Greetings, y'all. Welcome back to the garden. It's the beginning of the third week of May here in North Central Florida, and things are really starting to come to life, as you can see behind me. The Mexican sunflower is now well over 6 feet tall. We've got tomatoes on the vine, we've got watermelons starting to form, and I think it's finally time to harvest those Trashcan Taters I started several weeks ago. They've finally given up the ghost, they've stopped growing and pretty much died back entirely. So that's usually the telltale sign that potatoes, white potatoes, are ready to be harvested. So we'll pour those out of our trash can, see how epically I failed. You can make fun of me in the comments, and then we'll just do a little tour of the garden in general and just kind of see how things are coming along. Well, alrighty, y'all, it's finally tater time. Let's see if I epically failed or doubly epically failed. I'm really just going to take the trash can taters themselves, pour them into my little work cart. I think that'll be a little bit easier to see and harvest, and then we'll go through and see how many we got. I think I put 5 or 6 in. You can check by looking at the original trash can tater vid. I'll put a link to it here. But if I can get, 5 new taters for every seed tater I put in, that'd be awesome. And if I can get 10 or something like that, that'd be incredible. But they were small, little kind of golf ball size seed taters to start with. So I'm not expecting a whole lot, but at least they were different colors. And if I can get a whole bag of taters out of them, that'll be awesome. So let's take a look at them in the trash can. Before we dump them, I'll show you what to look for in terms of harvest signals from white potatoes themselves. Then we'll dump them out and see how we did. Alright, y'all, here's our trash can taters right here. And as you can see, they've pretty much given up the ghost, right? They've all died back naturally on their own. And this has been happening over the last, say, week to 2 weeks, really. They flowered, they were looking very lush and were sticking up several feet out of the trash can itself. And then, like flipping a switch, one day they start to yellow and wither from the bottom, and then they just sort of collapse in on themselves. And once they do this dieback like that, you want to let them sit for another week or 10 days or so, just to put on that last little bit of weight under the soil. But much more than that, and you run the risk of the tubers maybe kind of starting to rot. And because this is a container, it's not quite as well drained as the soil in the ground. I tried to put alternating layers of mulch in there to help, but it is still quite heavy, right? So now is probably the time to pour these guys out before they, potentially start to rot. And a few of them, as you can see, have just already completely gone. So I'm going to get on the other side here, pour out the taters into our little cart, and we'll see how we did. Can y'all see that? I'm going to move the camera back just a smidge here. Tons of worms in there, if nothing else. So let's dig through and see if we can find anything. Oh yeah, y'all, I see taters. Oh, look, y'all. There's the original seed tater, and here's all the little ones that actually have little rootlets, they're also starting to seed themselves. But sure enough, we got, 5 or 6 little taters off of that seed tater. Awesome. I'm going to put these to the side and try to find some more. Here's some more. Cool. These are like purple, and I believe they, of course, should be purple on the inside as well by the time everything is said and done. But you can see they're good size. These are actually bigger than the seed taters I put in, so that's a good sign. Here's another cool purple looking one. Here's some more, and as you can see, they all just kind of grow off of this same central tuber in the middle. This was a seed tater that then put out roots, grew a plant, and off of those roots, more tubers formed. Pretty cool. All right, so I'll just go dig through all of this and put them all aside, rinse them off, and we'll take a look at them. Alrighty, y'all. Here's the big epic harvest, such as it is. I can say that technically I got more out than I put in, but you can see they're actually in all different kind of stages of development. We've got these purple ones here, which are nice kind of mature size and feel to them, and then we've got these little tiny guys that are about the size of, a large grape, and others that have already started to sprout, and they've sort of turned into seed taters themselves and are trying to put out roots. So you can see different varieties mature at a different rate. And here's the original skin of one of the parent seed taters that just kind of gave up all of its essence to create the babies. So you can see different varieties can grow at different rates, and some can be quite mature and even start to be, seed taters themselves, so to speak, while others lag behind. So I could have probably let them go maybe another week or so in the bed in, you know, let them grow. But as you saw, they really did look dead, and it's kind of a fine line of knowing when to let them go a little bit longer versus getting them out of the ground before they rot, or like these guys, trying to take root again. So it was a fun little experiment. We got more out than we put in. I'll get a couple of good meals out of this, and they'll be cool looking because we got purple, red, white, all kinds of good stuff. And now I know for next year to probably just let them go a little bit longer, and that way they can have a little bit more time to fill out. And now that these have been harvested, I'm going to let them, what we call harden off, basically just let them kind of sit outside or put them in a shady place for a couple days, let that skin sort of toughen up on them a bit, and then I can just use them like I would any other kind of tater. But by taking them out of the soil and kind of getting them dry, they'll kind of stop growing, and they'll then kind of revert to their more dormant state, and we can just cook them and eat them like we like. So it was a fun little experiment with the Trashcan Taters. At least I was able to get everything out that I put into the container. When you grow it in the ground, sometimes you can't get everything back out again. So next year we'll do the same thing. We'll just let them go a little bit longer, and we'll try some different varieties. Alright, y'all, I just wanted to show you what a Mexican sunflower looks like from the bottom up. As you can see, you can tell where we did our chop and drop from last year, right? Those were the canes left over after I chopped last fall, probably around Christmas time or so. And as you can see, they've really sprung to life in the spring, as it were. And they've grown now probably, geez, they're probably 7, almost 8 feet tall. But you can see they have these very large sort of palmate leaves that grow off of kind of a cane-like stalk. And this is all they look like for most of the year, just sort of a large, leafy, kind of cane-like plant. But eventually in the late fall, they will start to form very orangey yellow little flowers at the very tip top. But that won't happen till around, you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas time. And in the interim, they just grow very fast, very large, very lush, and very green. And as a result, you get lots of biomass that you can then chop and then drop down onto your other crops. So we'll now use this as essentially a green mulch all around our watermelon seedlings, which you can see are all kind of in various stages of growth here. Some are doing a little better than others, but it's been so hot and dry that getting this green mulch, this green living manure, you might say, down on the raw exposed soil will really help to kind of preserve some of the moisture in there. Technically, you'll hear two types of plants, two different species of plants go by the name Mexican sunflower. The type we want for chop and drop that gets very large, puts out tons of large palmate leaves, and in the late fall will eventually put out sterile flowers at the top. The one you always see in permaculture, this is the Tithonia diversifolia. You'll also see Tithonia rotundifolia. I'll put a picture of that in here. And it's just sort of a smaller, more like reddish orange type of sunflower, and it can be grown from seed, whereas this Mexican sunflower, the Tithonia diversifolia that we're using for our chop and drop, is actually sterile and has to be grown from cuttings of the stalk itself. And these you can usually find, you know, online, eBay, Etsy, wherever, and you'll usually get, you know, 3 or 4 or half a dozen in the mail, and they're very cheap. You just stick them into some wet soil and they'll root in no time. A lot of people will take these, cut them, stick them straight into their yard, and they'll take root. So if you want to do chop and drop, get the diversifolia, which you have to order as cuttings, usually online. Right. Here's a quick little demonstration of the physical act of chopping and dropping itself. As you can see, I've got 2 sort of large canes that I took off the parent plant. They're each a little bit bigger around than, say, my index finger or so. And as you can see, they have sort of a cane-like structure with all these leaves. And you can simply go through, strip the leaves off with your hands, as I'm doing here, and then you'll be left with all of these canes. And you can then, you know, go through and snip these up with your clippers. You can leave them intact. You can really chop them up as much as you like. But what I like to do is put these long, sort of cane-like pieces right up along the base of the plants themselves, right? That way it's almost like putting little Lincoln logs at their base. It can actually kind of help support the plant, and it actually puts this most dense, sort of longest lasting piece closest to the roots of the plant. So as you can see here, I now have these canes sort of on either side of the base of the plant. And then I can go through with all the leaves, all the sort of lighter material, and I just kind of go in and backfill that. That stuff will just, you know, wither up within a day or so. But these canes will actually last for several weeks. And if you harvest them in the fall, they'll overwinter and just very, very slowly break down until you just see a very faint remnant of them several months later. So you can go through, leave these in their long stalk form, kind of lay those at the base of the plant, or you can chop them up as much as you like and just sort of scatter them around. Like I said, I prefer to kind of leave them in this long cane form and then just chop up the leaves, but you can chop them up as much or as little as you like. The idea is to take them off the mother plant and to very quickly, while they're fresh and green, get them down around the base. You'll sometimes hear this called green manure. There's lots of moisture and there's lots of nitrogen in it, which our little leafy viney plants like these watermelons are really going to love. So it's quite literally the act of chopping it off the mother plant, dropping it onto the ground, and processing it as much in between as you like. You can leave it intact. Some people just literally leave it untouched, or you can chop it all up and kind of turn it into fine mulch. Either way, here's a quick little tour of the melon patch we got going. As you can see, we've done our chop and drop. We put our canes along the base of the plants and then just kind of stuffed in the Mexican sunflower leaves. And you can see the watermelons coming up out of the top. These guys are probably well over my ankle, probably halfway up my shin, and they're doing great. I've also got some baby papaya that I planted about a week ago. I started those from seeds just in the grocery store, let them sprout, and now I put them into the beds here and they'll grow. They'll be ornamental as much as anything. It'll be a bit of a race to the end of the season to see if they make any fruit, but it'll be a fun little experiment to watch. I've also got ice cream banana tree, which is doing well, and clearly some little buggies are enjoying it as well, but it's, gosh, probably tripled or quadrupled in size since I put it in the ground a couple weeks ago. You can see that in one of my previous videos I'll post here. Here's some other melons that I haven't chopped and dropped yet. They're a little bit smaller, but as you can see, they're really starting to vine now, and they're putting on flowers, and I believe one of them actually already has a little small melon on it. Yeah, here it is. Look at this guy. Got our first little watermelon of the season starting to form. It's only about the size of a marble right now, but hey, we'll take it. And we've got lots of other flowers forming. And you'll see some people pinch these flowers, but there's no need to do that. Just let them go. I'll take as many melons as I can get. These are coming along. I believe these are like honeydew melons or something. And yeah, these guys are really starting to put on the flowers big time. And you can see they're really starting to stretch. I got well over 30 watermelons out of this patch last year, and eventually this whole thing will just get covered in vines and spill out into the rest of the yard, and that's just fine. And it's anchored by a mulberry. So they're coming along nicely. We'll finish up our chop and drop. We'll be good to go. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for joining me again this week in the garden. As you can see, we had some success, some failures, right? Our tater turned out all right. I got more out than I put in, which is always good. I maybe could have let them go another week, but as you saw, some are starting to sprout also, right? So, it's kind of a tricky call. We're not famous for our white potatoes necessarily down here in Florida, but it's fun to try. And I think using the smaller ones helps rather than the big, large baking potatoes. The same thing with our tomatoes, right? The smaller cherry tomatoes seem to be able to handle the conditions a lot better than the big, large beefsteak type tomatoes, which just take too long to ripen and can get busted up by large rainstorms, disease, things like that. So when it comes to tomatoes and taters, I say probably keep it small. That way we can kind of keep it quick, fast, and get lots of little harvests rather than one big harvest that may or may not actually succeed depending on the weather. And of course, our Mexican sunflower was doing great. We've got tons of that. I got to now go do the whole yard, chop and drop everything. It'll look a little stark after we cut everything back, but it'll grow right back in 2 weeks. And then about every, 4 weeks or so throughout the summer and the fall, you can just chop these guys down and put them wherever you like. And then they'll start to bloom again right around, at least here in North Florida, right around Thanksgiving, Christmas time is when these Mexican sunflowers will start to bloom. And just remember that you want to get the Tithonia diversifolia is the chop and drop permaculture sunflower, as opposed to the Tithonia rotundifolia, which is the more decorative kind of red ornamental sunflower. So thank you for joining me again this week. I've got some more updates coming next week. We'll check on our watermelons, our tomatoes again, and I've also probably got another trip to the homestead planned where I got to go out there, clean up some of the work we did last time, and maybe start working on a little bit of a shed or some water catchment so that I can actually start having some water out there so I can start doing some burns and get rid of all this waste that I've created over time. So we'll check that out next week. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers and chews.